In our next session, Dell'Oro Group's Research Director, Sean Morgan, will take us through what's next for Wi-Fi, from an update on Wi-Fi 7 adoption to Wi-Fi 8 timelines to global spectrum policy. All yours, Sean.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's great to be here. I love to come and talk about one of my favorite topics, which is enterprise class wireless LAN. I thought I might give you just a better understanding of the angle that I'm coming from here by explaining that I am an analyst for Dell'Oro Group. If you don't know us, we're a quant-based market analyst firm. We pride ourselves in being the gold standard in terms of market share, market sizing, market projections. So what you're going to see today is really a quantitative view as a framework to display and to discuss the trends. And what's really interesting about that is we get to see how those trends are going to impact the top line, market sizing, competitive displacements, all those great things. And so like any quant-based market analyst, I'm going to start with defining the market. We're talking here about a $10 billion market made up of revenues to system vendors that are selling access points and controller and licenses. But to really understand the factors that influence the market, you need to understand how that market breaks down. So we could break it down by region. So here you can see that North America is the largest region by revenue. But if we had the same graph by unit shipments, it would look very different. China would be the largest. If we looked at it on growth rates, different regions would pop up as well. We could break this market down by controller host or how the system is deployed. So here what's really interesting about public cloud managed wireless LAN is the vendor retains the control or management platform in their own facilities or in a hyperscaler facilities. And so they're able to deliver new features, software updates very rapidly. It often comes with a recurring license model as well. And we'll talk a little bit about more and how that's impacting the market. And also we could look at this by verticals. So there's a rainbow of verticals that correspond to a rainbow of use cases. And to really understand how the market is evolving, you really have to understand also how the wireless LAN is being used and what verticals it's being sold. Now, before going any further, I would just like to pause and look at where we are with respect to the pandemic, because it's still having impacts on the market today. And I don't want to foreshadow anything, but we may have some learnings that we need to apply in the future as well. So after the pandemic hit, we had 9 quarters of compressed demand in which vendors could not get enough supply to fulfill orders, and they started to grow these large backlogged order books. And when the supply came in, they released a tsunami of equipment onto the market in the fulfillment stage. And what we learned was that much of that equipment was double ordered or maybe ordered in advance in reaction to those long lead times. And so what followed was a digestion period where enterprises stopped purchasing or slowed their purchases in order to deploy the excess equipment that was available. And we are really just recovering from that now. And the other thing that's important to note from this graph is that I have normalized on the left-hand side that purple line, that revenue line, with the blue area. And as they diverge during the fulfillment stage, that's really a sign of growing service ASPs or pricing. So we really see a price escalation there that has not yet normalized back to pre-pandemic levels. On a regional basis, there are a lot of reasons why the different regions vary in terms of wireless LAN purchasing and revenues. Here I highlight just 2. On the left-hand side, when we subtract unit share from revenue share of a region, we get a view of average selling price. So what you're seeing here is that the North American selling price is much higher than the worldwide average. The selling price to China, much lower. So some of that has to do with market pricing, list pricing. That also has to do with product mix, with vendor mix, and with those software revenues, because that recurring license model is much less popular in China. And so it doesn't have the benefit of that accumulating license revenue. On the right-hand side, this is something that Thiago talked about a lot in the last session, which is spectrum policy. We see a rather fragmented view, perspective globally. We see that North America and the US led the way in terms of approving that 6 gigahertz for wireless LAN use. Not all countries have done so. Some of them have half of the band. And as Tiago mentioned, there's some interesting developments. Ofcom's proposal essentially now looking at letting wireless LAN use the entire band, although in that upper 540 megahertz of the upper 6 gigahertz band, they are talking about making that part mobile priority and using automated frequency coordination in order to avoid contention between wireless LAN and mobile. The first wireless LAN standard to allow the use of that 6 gigahertz band was Wi-Fi 6E, a variant of the 802.11ax. We're now firmly in the Wi-Fi 7 era. And what you see here is that with every standard, the maximum theoretical link rate has increased. It's not just in theory. In practice, when you look at the access points that vendors are releasing to the market, the Wi-Fi 7 access points, have doubled the capacity, doubled the throughput of the previous versions. And so really, we've had a great boom in terms of throughput enhancements, but that is coming to an end. So we know that Wi-Fi 8 is not looking at adding, doubling throughput, definitely not adding significantly more throughput, but the focus being a lot more on reliability, determinism, consistency. And I won't go through all the features of Wi-Fi 8. Catherine in particular, here's a call out to her. She's done some great writing on what those, those new features are, like unequal modulation or multi-access point control. But I would say that there is some concern in the industry overall that because there's not this advancement in throughput, that maybe enterprises won't adopt Wi-Fi 8, or maybe it will slow adoption of Wi-Fi 8. Well, from that perspective, I do have some good news, bad news, I guess, mainly good news. So when I look back at how technologies have been adopted over time, you'll see that the rate of adoption of each new technology does not really vary that much. It does a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about, more on a fine basis, but overall, I would say it does not vary that much. And one important thing to understand about enterprise buying is they're not buying Wi-Fi just because there's a new number, because it's the latest, greatest thing. They're buying it because there are business objectives behind it. And so they're buying it because they have new use cases, because they need to expand their network, or because the performance is not good. Maybe they're not getting the updates, or the technology is no longer supported by their vendor. So there are very good business reasons why. And it's not so much that it's 8 or 7 or 6. It's more related to those business objectives. So the good news is you can see that purple line on the right-hand side. That's our forecast for Wi-Fi 8. We are forecasting that for enterprises, it will be on the market in 2028, and that the adoption curve will be roughly similar to the previous technologies. A couple of things that does impact finally the slope of that line. It's quite a fine impact, but one of them is how long it takes vendors to get products to the market. So this graph asks how long did it take to get 100% of the vendors with at least one product of the new technology onto the market. It won't surprise you looking at this that after 7 quarters, Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 had the lowest adoption of any of the technologies you see there. It's maybe not fair for Wi-Fi 6E because that was only applicable to part of the market. And also it was released in the middle of the supply constraints. But it's true for Wi-Fi 7, although things are changing now. And it's not the only reason why an adoption curve might be slightly slower or slightly faster. The other reason is the depth of each vendor's portfolio, because when an enterprise comes to purchase, if they want like the entry-level access point, that has to be available in that latest technology for them to make that decision. But the other aspect is, of course, price premium. And so the good news here is that the Wi-Fi 7 price premium is very low compared to prior technologies, and we really are seeing an acceleration of that take-up. So Wi-Fi 7 was available to enterprises on the market in 2023. So we're in year 3 of that adoption curve now. You can see that it started out slowly, slower than Wi-Fi 5, sort of on pace with Wi-Fi 6, but it's accelerating. It's bypassed Wi-Fi 6 by now, and we expect in 2026 it will bypass the adoption rate of Wi-Fi 5 Wave 2. And the other thing to notice about this graph, when we look at the last 4 technologies that have been introduced to the market, Wi-Fi 5 had two variations, the wave 1 and wave 2. Wi-Fi 6 also had two variations, 6 and then 6E. So those second variations had a dilutive effect on the market and prevented the technology, that single technology, from reaching very high levels of adoption. That's not the case with Wi-Fi 7, so we do expect it to peak at a higher level than the prior technologies in about year 6 or year 7 of availability, which is when all historic technologies tend to peak in terms of adoption. So just to spend a few minutes now on vertical growth drivers, these verticals, it's a bit like having a portfolio of investments. What's nice about these verticals is when one is experiencing problems or headwinds, there's often another to come and take up the growth pattern. You can see there that the largest vertical is the financial and professional services vertical. That's kind of carpeted offices, what we call, followed by government. And the bars on the left there that have color, you can see that I've called those out in year-over-year growth on the right-hand side. And I just picked those because they've had interesting growth curves over the last 5 years. Hospitality has been going gangbusters. So that multi-dwelling units really underserved as a vertical, and so really been seeing a lot of growth there. Retail is very influenced by the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of growth in 2021 after the pandemic. Healthcare also influenced by the pandemic, but spending was much higher sort of in 2023 timeline. That's how long it took a lot of the institutions to start to implement those digital transformation projects. And then we're looking at higher education, which has really had a more difficult time of things lately. 2026 is the beginning of the demographic cliff. So that's the year where we're expecting a significant drop in the number of university-aged students enrolling in class. And that's because of a birth dip in 2007, 2008 during the recession. And on top of that, that vertical has had headwinds in terms of funding, et cetera. So we're expecting further contractions in that vertical going forward. So one thing that's common about all of these verticals is that they're all looking at AI. And so especially the larger organizations have already started to invest in proofs of concept to look at the best way to integrate a lot of AI into their business operations. What we're hearing, though, is that there is a struggle in terms of ROI for AI, in terms of making sure that return on investment is positive. One application of AI where the ROI is for sure positive is in AI ops. So this is the use of AI or machine learning to support network management and network operations. You can see here, this graph shows some of the categories that these AI ops features fall into. This used to be bleeding edge technology. Now it is more table stakes, I'd say, for vendors to provide these features. But what we have heard when we speak to enterprises is how the ROI proves in fairly easily. Here I have taken some quotes from some anonymized organizations in different verticals, but these ones talking about how the installation and configuration was so much easier, so much faster. This manufacturer talking about how they were able to identify rogue device behavior automatically. We hear a lot about radio resource management. So this is, a notoriously complex part of managing and configuring a wireless LAN network. So machine learning and AI ops algorithms to allow this to set and forget, are responsible for a lot of savings in terms of, network management. And then there's the category of features in natural language interface, which basically allows enterprises to reduce the skill level of the employees that are resolving the problems, responding to queries. We've heard from organizations about dramatic reductions in the number of trouble tickets due to AI ops. and detecting anomalies and fixing anomalies, fixing configuration problems that have been resident in the network for years, affecting performance, but nobody knew they were there. So these are just some real world use case benefits of AI ops as it comes to proving in return on investment. Now, in terms of quantifying what the impact of the delivery of these services are, we really see the difference in the controller and licenses segment of the market, this growing software revenues. On the right-hand side here, you see the growth of controller and licenses in orange compared to the growth of the total market. You can see that it has outpaced the total market most of the years previously. And the really interesting thing was in 2024, when we had that contraction, enterprises stopped buying equipment. So, there were double-digit revenue contractions in the market. Controller and licenses revenue continued to grow. And that is really the benefit of that recurring license model. On the left-hand side, these bar charts, it just looks at the share of software versus hardware revenue within that controller and licenses segment. You can see here how, it used to be dominated by the hardware controller, and more of this revenue is being attributed now to software licenses. I wanted to stop and just say a word about private cellular, because I often get asked the question, who is going to win the fight between wireless LAN and private 5G? And the answer is there's really no contest. The price difference is significant, and the ubiquity of wireless LAN really makes so that if we look at it on a total global revenue basis, the revenues of private wireless for campus are a fairly small portion of wireless LAN revenues. The advantage, though, of private wireless is that growth rate has been phenomenal. And it does fulfill a need where wireless LAN has fallen short in some cases, high power requirements, large outdoor areas, high mobility requirements. Really, there are some use cases where private wireless does excel. And but the news is there that all enterprises that are acquiring private wireless for their campus also need wireless LAN. And so because of that, we see these two technologies as very complementary. And there's really an opportunity there, actually, because the whole approach to session management in the 3GPP world, in the private cellular world, is so fundamentally different than it is in the IEEE world, in the wireless LAN world. And that percolates through to the management. And so really, we're talking about two separate management worlds here. And so there's an opportunity to really solve this mismatch. And the good news is, is that the Wireless Broadband Alliance, so shout out to them, has really issued a paper today on defining a framework for that integration. And so some really positive steps there to be able to bridge the gap between the management perspective of cellular and wireless LAN. So just to summarize here, we're talking about a continued market recovery. We are seeing inflationary pressure, some price increases, and we have our eye closely on some potential supply issues. We do hear about the shortage of memory components in the field. Lead times are starting to lengthen. So that's why it's important to learn the histories from the pandemic, because we may start to see some of those same characteristics appear going forward. We talked about the spectrum policy and the variation and the opportunities as more countries come on to approve the 6 gigahertz band. In China, my contacts in China have telling me that they're hopeful also for that China will approve some of that band as well. So that would be big news. We talked about AI ops and how really it's proving in AI, but it's also opening up the opportunity for managed service providers to come in with services, management services based on AI, and also for a new category of vendors, as a service vendors, campus NAS as a service vendors that are using AI ops also to manage networks from a central location. And we've talked about how the largely complementary nature of wireless LAN and private cellular. So I hope you got something out of this presentation. If there are Q&A in the chat, I would be glad to reach out to you afterwards to answer them because I believe, Catherine, we're probably running out of time now. Is that right?
We are exactly at time, so thank you so much. Again, there are networking opportunities to discuss this further if you would like, and we'll see everyone at the next session, which is our first panel of the day. So thank you, Sian. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Catherine.